I want you to think about the last time that you withheld feedback. Maybe it was to a colleague, maybe it was to a candidate, maybe it was to a friend, maybe it was to one of your direct reports if you are leading a team. And now I want you to think about what that conversation that didn't happen, what that actually cost you. And today I want to talk about feedback and how when feedback is done right, it can build trust, it can boost performance. And if you're a leader, it could even help you in making the right hires and faster. Those conversations that don't happen, that feedback that goes unsaid, this can cause challenges and it can lead to missed opportunities. And so today I want to talk about what feedback looks like when it's done right and why it matters so much in our organizations, in our interpersonal, of course, day-to-day relationships, and also even in the interview process. So we'll talk about also why feedback can feel uncomfortable, why we sometimes tend to naturally fear feedback, but also how with a simple shift in perspective, we can start to overcome that fear and look at feedback a little bit differently and instead as an opportunity for growth and to improve and ultimately to get better results. My name's Amy Miller. Let's go ahead and dive in. And I want to talk about this today because avoiding feedback creates missed opportunities for connection, for understanding, and ultimately to improve. That's what feedback is for, to help us get better, right? And in organizational psychology research, they talk about feedback loops specifically and how they can lead to higher productivity. And feedback loops are specifically that information exchange back and forth, helping to adjust and to improve your behavior as you go so that you can stay in alignment with your goals. And one example, IBM. We're all familiar with IBM, and they were struggling in the 90s and into the 2000s. And of course, they turn around. They had a turnaround. They made a comeback. But part of that turnaround came from not just setting, according to research, not just setting clear and specific challenging goals that were aligned with the organization, but also something that they did was work to create a feedback-rich culture. And so both of these initiatives helped in driving performance. So if you sometimes feel uncomfortable giving feedback, receiving feedback, there is good news, and we're going to talk about it today, some simple shifts that you can do to create some change and to just shift your perspective around feedback, look at it as an opportunity versus something that, we might fear. And I also want to talk about this because I don't think it's something that we're often actively thinking about. I think sometimes we hold back our thoughts, our feedback for fear of how the other person might react, of how they might take it, because it's going to be potentially an uncomfortable conversation. But we're not really thinking about that we're actively doing that maybe. So awareness creates change. And this is one of the reasons that I want to talk about this today. And also to help in everybody in creating better relationships in the workplace and improving performance. And of course, as the research shows, actually increase profitability. All right. So we're going to talk about the types of feedback and according to including what is effective according to organizational psychology. We're going to talk about why we sometimes fear feedback. We'll talk about look at some examples and case studies, and then those actionable takeaways, those action steps that you can start to implement to make some improvements here. Okay, so first, real quick, let's define feedback. What are we talking about? Well, research in organizational psychology defines feedback as specific information comparing. Okay, so this is the observed performance, and here is the standard. So this is what we're talking about in terms of feedback. And there are different kinds of feedback. There's outcome feedback, okay, success or failure. So after the goal was attempted, was it met? Did you succeed or did you fail? And then there's also process feedback, which tends to be more readily accepted by the individual, which makes sense because it's more motivating. If you're giving feedback in real time during the process, well, then the individual has an opportunity to adjust and improve versus if you, for example, no feedback or limited feedback, and then the end of the year, here's your annual performance review. Or sometimes in our interpersonal relationships, we delay that uncomfortable conversation until the uncomfortable feeling, the problem gets too big, and then we maybe blow up at the person instead of what we could have done is share the feedback initially, had that uncomfortable conversation before it had to get so uncomfortable. So process feedback. And then I was reading another article that talked about 3 other kinds of feedback: corrective, reinforcing, and developmental. So corrective, of course, is focused on a specific behavior. Here's a better way of doing something that we want to work toward. And then reinforcing is sustaining a positive behavior. So this is your good job type of conversations. And you can also give yourself reinforcing behavior. I think it's good to remind yourself to celebrate your wins and tell yourself good job, so we can give ourselves feedback too. And then there's that developmental feedback, which is more collaborative. So, hey, I see your potential, and the individual's open to the feedback, and we're going to work toward this together. Here are some suggestions, and that can be very motivating. So we see feedback is not always negative. It can be positive too, but still sometimes we fear feedback. So why do we have this natural tendency to fear feedback? Well, some psychologists theorize that we associate feedback with those criticisms that we received growing up. And I received a lot of criticism growing up. And I think I was thinking about this when I was preparing for the video. I think that part of the reason is because I've always been pro feedback, and that was not a popular opinion in my household growing up. Now, of course, I'm also very direct. That's my personality. So I've had to consciously, actively work to, because I don't want to just not be myself and not be direct and not share. But of course, we know there are ways to improve. But anyhow, yeah, we can fear feedback because we're attributing it, we're not attributing it, we're looking at it through the perspective, through the lens of how we received criticisms maybe when we were younger. And for example, I don't have bosses now. I work for myself, but I have had bosses in the past, and I've had great bosses. And still, sometimes when they would be calling me, I would have my heart drop into my chest and think, or my stomach, and think, I'm in trouble. You know, of course I'm not in trouble. It's ridiculous. Or if I'm driving and there's a cop behind me, I'm not doing anything wrong, I think, I'm in trouble. So it's a similar kind of thing, this fear of feedback, of getting criticism or thinking that we did something wrong or that we are in trouble. But if we can start to shift our perspective around feedback to look at it instead as a means to improve, then maybe we can not only be open to the feedback, but actually want the feedback. And first, I do want to say, I always like to talk about acknowledging your emotions. And I was excited to see in some of the articles that I was researching, which, by the way, I will leave the links to the articles that I refer to in the description. And so that way, if you want to pop them into Google Scholar and further read yourself, you'll be able to do that. So I think it's very important to acknowledge our emotions. Why? Well, if it's a positive emotion, this is information that is leading you in a direction that is going to make sense for you, helping you to align your priorities and focus on what is meaningful to you. And if it's an uncomfortable emotion, well, this is also useful information. Our uncomfortable emotions are trying to get our attention, to bring our attention to the problem. And so if we're constantly trying to push down the problem, ignore the uncomfortable emotion, well, we're not ever going to be able to figure out a solution because we haven't identified the problem, because we're ignoring it. So that's something that myself and I know other speakers and psychologists like to talk about too. And in an article I was reading in a Harvard Business Review, it talks about fear, or it's called fear of feedback. But it says in the article that the first step, if you do feel uncomfortable with feedback, is to acknowledge the fear. So I thought that was pretty cool. And it also talks, research also talks about, I think it was that same article, persevering, doing the detective work, which I like to say you want to go 7 layers deep. So if you have an uncomfortable emotion, I know we're talking about feedback here, but you can also take and apply this concept to other areas. I like to say you want to go 7 layers deep. You want to keep digging. So first you want to identify the emotion. Okay, I feel, uncomfortable or frustrated or angry or whatever it is. Okay, but why do I feel this way? And then that's not going to be the real reason. And then you want to take it further. Okay, but what is it about that thing that makes me feel this way? And the beautiful thing about continuing to dig deeper is ultimately you will have an aha moment. You will figure it out. You will you will dig deep enough and you'll find the root cause. And then, of course, you can figure out the solution from there. But anyhow, moving on from there, I love root cause and digging deep and introspection and self-reflection. But giving feedback, you can look at it instead of a criticism, if it feels that way to you sometimes, as an investment. So, and also if you're the one giving the feedback and you're a little nervous about it or uncomfortable, remember that this is a choice to invest in the individual. You're helping them. You're giving them an opportunity to see something from your viewpoint and outside perspective that could potentially help them to improve. So feedback is an investment because we don't have to take the time, we don't have to take the risk to give that, to have that challenging conversation. And if somebody does that, then they care about you, they care about the relationship. And then, if you do give the feedback and it is uncomfortable for the individual, let's say it's a personal relationship and they fall away, which can be a big fear for a lot of us. Well, that just means that that's probably not a relationship that's meant for you. And you just freed yourself up to focus back on, you have more time to focus back on your priorities. And a little bit more on the research, an article was talking about how we need feedback because from the time we're babies, our growth and development is based on feedback. So while we may not always want the feedback, while it can sometimes feel uncomfortable, I need to trim my bangs. It is well intentioned, and we do need it. So we can start to think about it like that. And feedback, we want to be honest with our feedback, of course, and that is going to create trust and it's going to help to build a culture of trust within your team. If you're giving feedback in real time, for example, versus withholding it until you have to have that uncomfortable conversation, this is going to help create stronger connections and trust within your team. And if you think about performance and motivation, who do we work harder for? People that we feel connected to. Who do we want to be surrounded by? People that we feel connected to. So this honest real-time feedback can help to create trust and improve performance. So let's look at, think about some types of groups that we admire, that we look up to, that we appreciate, that we emulate, that we want to be like. So maybe, for example, the U.S. Army or sports teams. So I'm sure you probably have heard of after action reviews, which started with the U.S. Army in the 1980s. And the purpose of AARs or after action reviews is to improve, to look at, okay, here's what we did in this combat mission or in this training, for example. Now, what can we take? Here's how we did. How can we improve? And so it's reflecting on past performance to then gather the takeaways to improve, to make you better, to make you stronger, to make you more equipped. And sports teams and also performers. I saw something on Beyonce after her performances. She goes backstage and she watches. So maybe sometimes that could be a painful thing to do, probably not for Beyonce. But this is how you get better. You see what you did well, you celebrate that, and then, okay, now how can I improve? And back to sports teams, I was reading about the San Antonio Spurs and Coach Popovich. And there's an article in him called, I think it's called Magical Feedback. And it was talking about how he gives his players, or did give, I think he's not their coach anymore. I'm not a big sports person, but maybe I will be because it's fun to, or become one. It's fun to research the teams. But anyhow, he gave his players very direct, real-time feedback in the moment. And maybe it was tough to hear. Maybe they felt like they let him down or made a mistake or whatever. But as long as we're taking the lesson and learning from it, we're becoming better equipped. And feedback gives this opportunity. So then our undesired outcomes are just that. It's not a mistake. It's an undesired outcome that we can learn from. And by receiving that feedback, we have more of an opportunity to do that. And then Coach Popovich, so yes, he was giving real-time direct feedback, but also from a warm and genuine place. So he's investing in his players rather than waiting, till the end of the season and then they didn't have an opportunity to improve by taking it in another perspective that could potentially help them. And also research in teams and in leadership shows that team or individuals who openly give and receive feedback have a better, they demonstrate better, a more positive attitude, better behavior toward their peers versus team members or individuals that don't give and receive that feedback openly. And something similar research talked about with leadership or leaders that openly receive upward feedback from their direct reports improved over leaders that did not receive that upward feedback. So that's another way that fostering these feedback-rich cultures can help in improving not only team performance but also leadership performance. So when we're giving feedback, we want to speak freely. We want to be open. We want to listen. We want to tell the truth. And I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with the truth. I've met a lot of people that are uncomfortable with the truth, but the more we tell it, of course, there's ways to do it, and I'll talk about that now. The easier it gets, and then again, you're going to have better opportunities for closeness and in connection in your interpersonal and your professional relationships and your team. So we've heard of, I'm sure you've heard of the compliment sandwich, where which is not necessarily recommended. I don't recommend it. And I think I read research where it's not necessarily recommended. I'm not sure, but this would be, okay, you start with the positive, which that can be a good thing to do. And then now here's the area of development, and then, or the weakness, or the criticism, if you will. And then here's another compliment, which maybe doesn't have anything to do with what we just talked about. So if we do that and lead off with another compliment, we kind of undid the challenging conversation that we just had. So I think a better thing to do would be, yes, lead with the positive. So here's what I see that you're doing well, however you want to say that. Here's an area of that I think you could improve, and here are some suggestions. And then lead off with the why and the how. The how being maybe an action step that that they can take, and an example, an anecdote, so they really take in what it is that you're sharing, the suggestion, and then what it's going to potentially look like. So how making that change is going to benefit the employee or your friend or your team member, or whoever is involved in the conversation. So lead with the positive, directly share the specific challenge, negative feedback, and then how it's going to help the individual improve. And remember, we want feedback to be part of it, two-way communication. So feedback up, feedback down, understanding, taking in, questioning if you don't, clarifying if needed, so that you're making a real connection. So those are the sort of the principles of feedback. Let's look at talk about some examples or case studies. So specifically in the interview process, if you are a leader and you're going through the hiring process, something that I see a lot of is leaders not giving that direct real-time feedback to their candidates and or to the recruiter. So you want to give real-time feedback to your candidates, to the recruiters as we're searching, and of course to your leadership team. But a lot of times, hiring managers, I see this where they don't ask the question behind the question. They don't come out and directly during the interview share with the candidate, maybe, okay, so this is what's working, what I think is strong about your candidacy. This is what I'm hearing that is working. My question is specifically XYZ. This during the interview, this is an investment in the candidate. Yes, it can maybe feel like an uncomfortable conversation, a challenging conversation, because you feel like maybe you don't want to put the candidate on the spot. Why? Because hiring managers are nice. They don't want to put the candidate on the spot, but when we miss this opportunity to give that real-time feedback, we don't give the candidate the opportunity to overcome that potential concern. And if they have the opportunity to overcome it, and then they do, then you learn quickly by giving that feedback in real time that it's actually not a concern. And then you can move the candidate forward in the interview process. And I was working on an expansion years back, and this candidate had done very well throughout the entire process. And then she got to the final panel interview, and the CEO, nice guy, direct guy. I appreciate directness, but it can makes us feel uncomfortable sometimes, that direct feedback. And he gave my candidate very direct feedback. And I don't know if it made her uncomfortable or caught her off guard. I don't remember if we talked about that, but it probably did. But what she did is she seized the moment and the opportunity to take the feedback, to adjust and course correct during the interview. And as a result, they moved. Well, she got the job, and then she later got promoted. She was at the company for a long time. She might still be there even. I have to check. But that could have been a missed opportunity, a different decision that the CEO could have made in that interview is he could have thought, well, she's not doing this or she is doing this. So I don't feel like it's a fit. I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to later let the recruiter know that I'm going to pass. And this would have seriously delayed of course, we don't want to rush and make the wrong hire, but it could have delayed the interview process because then we would have gone back to the drawing board and lost out on a solid candidate. So think about those conversations that you didn't have, that feedback that you withheld, maybe in an interview where that candidate didn't get the opportunity to overcome that challenge. Or maybe you keep moving that candidate forward in the process, but instead of giving the candidate the direct feedback, or even the recruiter saying, hey, this is my concern, go ahead and let them know that we're going to be digging into this in the next interview so that they come prepared. We think they're strong here, here, and here, but we want to make sure that they can overcome this challenge. By letting the candidate know or letting the recruiter know so that they can let the candidate know, they have an opportunity to overcome that. Because I've had the conversations where, and sometimes, just real quick, I have this happen for myself where I don't have the question fully formed all of the time. In the moment, it takes me some time. So that can happen. But once you understand fully what your hesitation is, bring it up. Go ahead and give that feedback to the candidate, to the recruiter, so that you give the candidate an opportunity to overcome that challenge. That's going to strengthen the relationship between yourself, the hiring manager, and the candidate, because the candidate feels like you're being honest with them. This is going to create trust. It's going to make them want to pursue the opportunity more, to feel more motivated, to perform better. And then when you've got that strong relationship and they get the job, they're going to want to work harder for you. So you can avoid creating missed opportunities and delays in the interview process by giving real-time feedback. All right, so that's my interview process example. And we talked about examples just in life and in your interpersonal relationships. And we talked about how you can strengthen your relationships across your team by giving that feedback and creating that feedback-rich culture. Let's see. So what are some takeaways that you can take and apply moving forward if feedback is uncomfortable for you, giving that feedback as a leader, receiving that feedback as a friend, as a teammate? So first, we want to acknowledge the problem if it is a problem. Just consider your perspective, how you feel. So start again with the feelings. How do you feel about feedback, giving feedback, receiving feedback, and see if it is something that is potentially needs some shifting. Okay. And then also remind yourself that when you change your perspective, you change the way that you view things. So if you start to look at feedback a little bit differently, what you're going to see is going to look different. And remember to think of feedback as a means to improve. I love improving. I'm so huge on self-improvement. If you watch my content, you know that by now. And you may have heard me talk before about how growing up, my trophy was always most improved. And I hated it because I thought it meant, well, you weren't very good and you're a little bit better, but you're still not very good. But today I love it. I fully embrace it. Improving, because it's perseverance. You keep trying. There's no such thing as perfection, because that would mean that you can't get any better. And that's not true. And we can enjoy the process more along the way by being more open to giving and receiving feedback. And it feels really good to surround yourself with people that you can be honest with. So try it out. Take a little risk in having a potentially challenging, potentially uncomfortable conversation. But if you do it in real time versus waiting until it blows up, or waiting until the end of the year performance review, or waiting until the candidate falls out of the process, these kinds of things, situations, then you're going to likely have stronger relationships, and giving and receiving that feedback is going to get easier. And let's see. A couple other, I'll just mention, I was trying to decide if I had time to mention these real quick. I was going to link them in the description, but I didn't because it was too long. So if you want the links to this information, just message me and I'll send it to you. But I really love Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz's, that's hard to say, 4 Steps to Change Your Brain. And it's just a short 5-minute video. You can look it up on YouTube. But he talks about acknowledging the emotions. So that's one of the first things. I'm circling back on this real quick. If we have an uncomfortable emotion. And then also Jordan Peterson, he has a video where he talks about this children's book called The Dragon Story. I love this so much, super passionate about it. So the dragon is a problem. And when we ignore our problems, when we ignore or avoid those uncomfortable challenges, those uncomfortable conversations, well, guess what? The problem's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger until you give it some attention. So give those uncomfortable, take a risk, have the uncomfortable conversation. You might surprise yourself. It may not be as uncomfortable, or it might be, but it gets easier with practice. So practice giving the feedback, ask for the feedback, and then you can practice receiving feedback. And a little trick, if the feedback does feel uncomfortable and you do find yourself feeling a bit defensive, just choose to reflect before you react or before you respond. Just take a deep breath and don't say anything. Give yourself some grace, or maybe say, okay, I need a moment to reflect on that. And then once the emotions settle, then you'll be much more likely to respond versus react. That one takes some practice, but I've been practicing it. I'm much better at it now. Still might, have a little setback or mishap once in a while, but yeah, that's okay. We're all improving. And also, as a leader, remember that research shows that how your team is more likely to model your behavior. So if you as a leader are open to giving and receiving feedback, then your team members are likely to be as well. So remember, feedback is designed to make things better. It's designed to help us improve. There's always room to improve. And the main takeaway that I want everybody to get from watching this video is that avoiding those uncomfortable conversations and the feedback, giving and receiving the feedback, creates missed opportunities. And we want to create opportunities instead to improve and to create those closer connections. So thank you so much for watching. If this resonated, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. And also you can check out the links below if you'd like to learn about my coaching, my workshops, or my consulting. I help individuals acknowledge what it is they want, believe they can achieve it, and take action. And of course, I also help leaders make lasting hires, more lasting hires with less stress. And I bring 10 years of recruiting results, my background in organizational psychology, and then of course, the tools that I learned from overcoming my own challenges. My name's Amy Miller, and that is it for this one. So we will see you next time. Thank you.